Zero apologies.
Droppin Truths.
Hey, this is us doing anti-racist work in Olympia, Washington, and throughout the country.
If we're doing it right, you're going to be a little bit uncomfortable, if not a lot of it uncomfortable. So sit with it and grapple with the truths we drop.
It's time to do the work, people. Hey, we're on. Zero apologies.
Droppin Truths.
Woo! A little different today. How about the venue? Let's talk about the venue. We got aprons and
hella books.
Yeah, good books.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a second about why are we virtual?
Well, because though we've been maintaining like the 6 feet of distance, etc., COVID numbers keep skyrocketing. So in the interest of keeping good health for ourselves and our families, we are virtual.
Yeah, we're virtual. And I don't know what number we're on today, but it's like in the 9s. It might even be double digits.
I think we're double digits now, yeah.
Oh, that's kind of fun. So back to the purpose of the podcast, talking about social justice, anti-racism, quote unquote, the work. And the work that we've, just for some people, for summary purposes, the work has been, you got to learn in community. And then you got to sit with, what you learn with. Once you know more, you do more and do better. And you definitely need to lean in and pay attention to what's going on around us. So welcome, Dr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Sir Cronk.
So what are we going to talk about today? We've got a lot to talk about. We've got a vaccine is been administered, and we were just talking about off camera. African-American woman was one key part of creating that vaccine. So that's cool.
Black girl magic.
Yeah, and we need to continue to share that story as widely as possible.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Black women have been holding it down in 2020. I mean, throughout history, let's be honest.
I was going to say.
In 2020. So on behalf of all Black women, you guys are welcome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely helped in the election for sure.
You're welcome for that too.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a concept about centering Blackness, and specifically about looking at and talk a little bit about the most marginalized people or persons being Black women, and talk about that concept and the concept of centering Black women and Black women's experience.
Sure. Well, I think it's like, Malcolm X said, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman, the most unprotected person in America is the Black woman, and the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. I think when you look at the idea of intersectionality, which is when you have multiple different identities and they intersect at points, so that you might have privilege as a white person, but experience oppression as a woman. So a white woman together has some like interconnected identities and dynamics that happen in that space. And so in a system where we have intersecting identities at all times, having a Black person walk through the world in a system that uplifts white supremacy is challenging. Having a woman who walks through patriarchy is challenging. And so as our system works, the Black woman is the most impacted constantly through the oppression system that we have.
Oh, now I get it. So for those of us that this may be new information, I mean, lots of different things to explore there, lots of ways to raise your own awareness and sit with that new knowledge and that relearning. And then when we get there, so then let's talk about once we appreciate the ways that privilege interact within our lives, then I think once you have that awareness, then you can start moving in a different way, right? And then you can start interacting in a different way with a different level of, well, empathy, but appreciation for that struggle. And then realizing that using, if you happen to be a white person, in my case, if I'm a white male, I can start using some of my privilege to then center that in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because once you know about privilege, you can't unknow it, first of all. And so then with great reward comes great responsibility, right? And so anytime you put at the center in a situation the person that is most impacted by where a system is failing, then in moving towards a solution for that particular population, you will solve all of the other lower impact oppression or hardship or difficulty that's existing in the system. So in that space where Black women are the most marginalized throughout our system, if you center Black women, that means that on the way to doing that, on the way to any action towards prioritizing and lifting up and emphasizing what Black women need in a space, you'll inherently resolve everything else.
So I like that concept, and I like the, I just like how, as I sit and think about what does that mean for me professionally in the institution that I'm a part of, what does that mean as I interact and I guess go about my life in the world trying to be anti-racist, and that gives some perspective on how to look at the system of privilege, and then what do I do with it in a different way, right? And you're right. And the other concept is once you understand your privilege, you can't unknow it. And that seems to be like a little bit of a driver for me, is that, so if I have this thing that's, I didn't ask for it, but I've got it for sure. It's kind of like an all access pass. Now, what do I do with that all access pass? And I think until you really get to understanding what that really means, then the job is to lift everybody up and use that for the we before me sort of a concept, rather than just me.
Right. And that it's part of it is like there's these fine lines, right? Like where you inside of your privilege can be like, okay, I need to lift up Black women. And it's like, that's like, you have to lift the concerns without trying to save anyone, right? And so you prioritize the needs without saving anyone. And so it seems like a radical principle until you think about where it applies in all other life. So for instance, let's say you have a family and it has, 2 adults, and then you have 3 kids who are like pretty self-sufficient, 12 to 16-ish, and then you have a toddler, okay?
Ooh,
so
I know exactly.
I mean, yay for toddlers, but also there's some challenges. So you and this family of, let's say, 6 are deciding to go on a road trip. Okay. Now, when you think about how often you're going to stop, how often you're going to eat, how often you're going to do snacks, who do you prioritize in that situation?
Right, for sure, the toddler.
The toddler, because the toddler is like, look.
You're right. Even if you didn't prioritize the toddler would figure out a way to.
The toddler will let you know, right? And so if you think about that, like, so everyone has been in a situation similar to that, whether it's like you have family get-togethers and you have the baby and you're like, okay, what will the baby need? But like when you think about that individual, it's not because they're helpless. It's not because they can't voice their concerns. They'll let you know totally. And when you're in consideration of that toddler who needs to get up every 35 minutes, inherently your 15-year-old who's like, I'm not trying to sit still for 6 hours, their needs will be met because they'll have an opportunity to get out of the car, right?
Great analogy.
And so it's that. We do centering all of the time. And so what would happen if you center?
God, now that you put it that way.
And it's important to know that like none of you in that 6-person family are losing. It's not like, oh, okay, because you as an adult have to stop for this toddler, that means you don't eat. No, like we all eat, we all win. We just have to meet the needs of the person who has the least amount of capacity to meet the need of the situation.
I love that. You know, what we haven't really discussed on Zero Apologies has been the skill by which you use analogies. You knew where I was going before I even said it.
I did. Yeah, I did. It's true. I'm very good at analogies.
I don't need to sit with that in the same way that I need to sit with some of the learnings that I've had over time, but I am just in awe. So I am
You're like
with it.
mind blown.
It's like, wow. I wish I had the little emoji deal.
Totally. Yeah, so I think it's like in those situations, I think what prevents us from centering Black women or even marginalized populations based on context is the idea first of when you take action to right something, then you have to admit that something's wrong.
Right.
And there's a lot of responsibility and guilt that white folks feel once they realize they've been holding this bag of chips or golden ticket or whatever the thing is. And so there's some reckoning that comes with that of like, okay, but I had a hard time too. I worked really hard to get my degree, whatever the thing is. And it's like none of those things are being discounted. Yes, you worked, but also like when you stepped up to the plate, you had more opportunity to do that work. And that's a critical point. I think the other part is this feeling of like, okay, if the world is imbalanced, then the only way to right it is to flip it. And so you're talking about like karma and revenge versus just righting the wrong, which is to say, again, like when the toddler gets out, we all get out, right? We all get to stretch our legs. We all get to use the bathroom. And yes, there might be times where you're like, again, but you have to think about that toddler has not had the experience that you all have had in figuring out how the world works because the access hasn't been given. So it's critical to understand that when you center that toddler, it's not at the cost of anyone else. You're actually righting the wrongs so that it evens out.
Right. And I think that many people, or at least me as a white person, thinking about it, you know, the first, I don't know, how many times do I relearn about my privilege and the discomfort that causes and all of the things that go into that is, am I going to lose? Am I going to lose? Am I going to lose something? And no, you're not going to lose something. It's going to be better for everybody because racism really impacts everybody. I mean, look at what's going on just this last 24 hours in Olympia and across the country about the protests. We won't get into the politics necessarily, but just, you know, the disagreement and the I guess the degeneration of the dialogue has gone so violent. I mean, I really can't even put words to it that it isn't about you know, winning and losing anymore. It's about righting a wrong that's been going on for 400 or 500 years now.
Right. And there's an incredible scholar activist named Jeff Andrade.
Yeah.
You know the middle name, right? Okay, so one of the principles, he's amazing, and we'll put the link to his resources below. But he has a theory or a strong belief that anytime you're trying to do equity work and you aren't basing it and relating it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then you're missing it entirely and you can't move forward. And I think if you look at what's happening in Olympia, what's happening across the world, what's happening anytime there's contention, is that there is a foundational belief that some of our base level needs, if not the first level, then the second, are not being taken care of. And in those spaces, we don't have the ability to access the highest and best use of ourselves. So for instance, you think about like people who foundationally and fundamentally believe that like to right the wrongs of slavery, to right the wrongs of anti-Blackness, and all of those will come at the cost of their personal resource or their personal money or whatever the thing is, right? So they understand like to move that dial will take away from me. And if you think about like if I think I can't meet basic needs or the need for safety and security, then I can't access the parts of me that are like, I read this book, I found some tips, I'm challenging how I think because I'm at base level security. And so it makes sense that people are showing up biologically and inside of their mind. It makes sense that they're showing up in that way. And we have a responsibility to look at it fully. And so until we can do that, we'll never be able to move forward.
And so I like that. I'm sitting with that a little bit, not from a discomfort point of view, but just from a thinking about it point of view. But then talk about Maslow, because Maslow created, the hierarchy of needs, but later on he discovered another, I always thought that it ended at self-actualization. And I think many people know that, you ebb and flow up and down the hierarchy because your needs are always changing. And just because you satisfy one level doesn't mean that you're done satisfying that level. You move all over the triangle. So talk about, the brilliance that you discovered was there's another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so most people are familiar with the 5-level pyramid. It starts with basic needs, then moves to security and safety, then it moves to connection and belongingness, and then esteem, both self-esteem and the esteem of people around you. And then self-actualization is often positioned at the top. And self-actualization is the ability to look around you, figure out how to better yourself, and figure out like what your purpose is. And so many people, especially the self-help industry, have profited even, but especially built a lot of foundational truth on that 5-level pyramid. But about 26 years after Abraham Maslow discovered that principle and had shared it, and it's been accepted in so many disciplines, he actually revisited it himself and said, I think it's bigger than that. And so he added a 6th level, which is self-transcendence. And that's the ability to, having gone through all of those other 5 levels and understanding how do you best show up in the world, you understand fully that it's not actually about you and that it's about finding community and finding common purpose and pouring everything that you are into that. So it's literally we before me. This was in 1969 that he updated that. So not a lot of people. If you hear about Maslow's hierarchy of need, it often has the little pyramid with self-actualization on top, but that's not the end of it.
So that's something that our readers or our listeners / viewers could look at is transcendence,
Mm-hmm.
and then go from there and talk about, dismantling and the pathway of being anti-racist, because there's no middle ground between racist and anti-racist. You're anti-racist. Moving down that path, knowing that by dismantling that system, and then the other thing that you made me think about when you were talking was the connection and belongingness part of the hierarchy, is that we do need all that. We do need that connection. But living in a white supremacist, racist system does not allow everyone to belong and connect in the same way. Obviously it doesn't. But I think I think until you start thinking about that, what does belonging really mean? And if Black people do not feel that they belong in our society, that's a problem. We were taking it, you and I had talked about, how does this relate back to the YMCA? And we were talking about what does it really mean to feel like you belong in a YMCA? Now we've just expanded that to talk about what does it feel like to belong in society when, as a Black person, you potentially wake up, not even potentially, I'm not a Black person, but when you wake up and you think that the world, everything about this does not want me to be successful and in sometimes even live. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're here. I mean, that's exactly why we're doing what we're doing, is that it's the urgency by which we're talking about this is because people are dying, and they're dying because of the color of their skin.
Right.
And it's unacceptable.
And inherently, white supremacy is based on a number of different tenets that post up pillars for it to thrive. One of those is individualism. And so the idea that we as individuals walk around in the world, then when my hierarchy of needs comes in conflict with yours, then I preserve my own because survival is critical, right? And so if I believe fully and truly that we are individuals walking around, then my basic needs will always come before your basic needs every time, because that survival is the point, right? But like if we can advance from level 1 all the way to level 6, then we understand that like my survival depends and exists for the sake of your survival. And that shift is what happens when you start understanding that it's collective liberation we're looking for, instead of thinking about, well, if my family is set, if my family is good, then it doesn't really matter how the Cronks are doing, because my goal in life is to keep the Lloyd family strong, right? So that shift, that metanoia of like, what is the actual true purpose of life? That 6th level of Maslow is often not shared, probably because it flies in the face of white supremacy.
Yeah, right.
Because the ultimate goal is not me being my best. The ultimate goal is me being my best for the sake of everyone around me, for the sake of the collective, for the sake of society.
Yeah, that well said.
Yeah, and so I think, and in that, the sustaining of white supremacy is inherently killing us all. And that's how you can get to a point of being like, okay, so white supremacy, let me walk this through. There are hella benefits for white people. So how are they being harmed by white supremacy? It's because all of us exist for the greater good. So if any of us are drowning, all of us are drowning.
Yeah. And yeah. Excellent. So some definite, we talk about action points, or we have talked about, we don't do it every time, but in many cases we talk about, what are people doing, and what is the doing of anti-racism as it relates to where you are on your journey. If you're just tuning in, I mean, what you could do pretty simply right now is look up self-transcendence in Maslow's hierarchy and talk about we before me. And you could do a little research there. You could also research some definitions of white supremacy. You could do some research around privilege. And what do, in the work, what do people do that have privilege, and how do they use their privilege to be more anti-racist? Those are all good things. Do you have any other potential things that people could do?
Yeah, I think it's also about just having hard conversations and doing that well. Well does not mean without discomfort. What it means is maintaining respect, but challenging really, like, what do you believe is true about the world, and how does that need to be challenged in order to center Black women?
Oh, I like that. I even wrote that one down because that is, I mean, in my journey in trying to learn, I mean, trying to figure out how do I center Black women, and how do we do it as an organization or an institution. In any institution, as you are, you're part of a bunch of different things. I'm part of the Y. I'm part of Rotary. I'm part of, mountain bike groups and other things. And so how do I center that in every opportunity that I've got to do that?
Yeah, and like I think, again, like centering is not about being like, no one cares what you think, Kyle, be quiet, because like, here come black women. It is to say like, okay, so in this situation, how have I like lifted up blackness? How have I prioritized blackness? And how have I assessed the needs of black people before anything else? So for instance, in your mountain biking groups, like, are there black people present? Minimal, probably. Why do you think that is? What could we do differently to create space as though it was designed for black people to show up?
Mm-hmm.
And then how will that shift and change how we're showing up in this space, right? It isn't about being like, do you have black friends? Invite them to this very white supremacist bubble. That's not centering, right? That's harm. That's harm.
Yeah, right.
So, but it is to say, like, I don't care if there are black mountain bikers or not. How do we, like, should there be one? How would we make sure today that they would understand this was designed for them?
I love that.
Because then you can avoid tokenizing and really, really prioritize and center, right? You envision that road trip with the toddler. How would we treat it?
Yeah,
and
no.
You never are like, God, what a waste of space that toddler is. No, you also aren't like, we should probably save them. You're just like, we love them and we want this to go well for everyone, right? We all want to make it to Lincoln, Nebraska, where we're going, you know? I don't know why we're going to Lincoln, Nebraska, but we are. Go Huskers.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. So back to the learning 1 second. So again, awesome analogy. To keep that in the forefront, and that's a great thing to keep in mind as you think about how do you center, going back to the toddler and the trip. Also, talking about when we're learning, we're learning in community. I mean, I think there's some individual learning that you're doing for sure, but once you go down a path, we need to get into community to be able to continue to have those conversations again. Sometimes they're uncomfortable, but that's the necessary part of the work. And I think one thing that we haven't done yet through Zero Apologies or through the Y is figure out how do we create that community of learners. I mean, I think there's a tremendous opportunity going forward in 2021 to figure out how do we get into some of these learning pods or connection groups. I think that would be a good thing. And when we can come back together, I mean, I think it would be
It'll be on and popping. It'll be on and popping. Yeah. So I think a couple things. One, you said sometimes it's uncomfortable. I think if you're doing this work well and you're doing this work honestly, then it should be uncomfortable all the time. Because the reality is, like, when we're having discussions and I say something, this happens often, right? And then you're like, huh? And you're like, I'm sweaty now. Like, yeah, right. That discomfort is not me generating discomfort. It's me saying, like, okay, since we're in relationship, I'm going to share with you what I've been carrying, and I'm going to ask that you pick up some of it, right? And so I think understanding that, like, every honest conversation about this work should be uncomfortable. I had someone come for me yesterday on Facebook, and part of their thing was like, how you show up is, it like puts people off because it's really uncomfortable. And I'm like, yeah, like that part isn't about me making you uncomfortable. It's not about like generating a feeling of discomfort. And it's definitely not about there not being truth. Because you're uncomfortable, it means you're looking at something inside of your own self and saying, like, I need to look at that. And I'm not accountable for that. I am accountable for when I do harm, but you should be uncomfortable when you do this work honestly. I think the other part is that, yes, absolutely, we have some engagement things coming. And Kyle Cronk, I got big plans for 2021. So I hope you all stay tuned because we're going to be doing some club magic. We're going to be drinking beer together. We're going to do all kinds of dope shit with 2021. So
I know.
if you're not subscribed on YouTube, go do that right now. If you're not following us on Spotify, do that. And please go like our Facebook page because that's where it's going to be popping.
Cool. Do you want to highlight a Black-owned business?
Boy, do I. Oli Tap Room. Speaking of beer, we should get them in on the beer goodness.
That's awesome.
Oli Tap Room is so fire. They're open even though we have the COVID times and all of that. They're figuring out ways to do their patio and all of that. And I'm pretty sure you can get like growlers to go and stuff. So support Oli Tap Room. They have incredible local brews. They don't have Cronk brew yet though, so
No.
we should get that hooked up.
I think we're away. Maybe I could get the emergency approval, the FDA sort of thing.
Yes. Then there'll be Cronk Tap Room too.
Exactly. And then shout out to Cabin Light Studios. We love
Cabin
them.
Light. Yes.
They do a tremendous job making Sarah and I look great. Sarah already looks great, but they do a lot of work to make it so that I look okay and am camera ready. So here we are.
Hours of work there.
and now we're doing it virtually and on the web. So we'll see what this turns out to be like. But thanks, Cabin Light. We love you.
Brown owned, Brown operated. Love that Brown generational wealth building. So we appreciate you. And special shout out to Brenda, who's kicking it with us today.
Right.
Making magic happen despite the distance.
All right. Well, we will see everybody at the next episode. Be safe. Happy holidays.
Peace out.
Peace.
This was Zero Apologies, Droppin Truths. White folks, share this with your friends and make sure you're doing the work.
And Black folks, welcome home.